"I slept with my ex," she said. My calm response changed everything. The evening rain drummed against the windows of their suburban home as Emma sat across from her husband David at their kitchen table. Her blonde wavy hair caught the soft lamplight, framing a face that had grown distant over recent months. She twisted her wedding ring nervously, the gold band that once symbolized their unbreakable bond now feeling heavy on her finger. "David, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up from his laptop where he'd been reviewing quarterly reports, his dark eyes meeting hers with a patience that had defined their 5-year marriage. David had always been the steady one, the man who fixed problems with quiet determination and never raised his voice, even when she pushed every button. "I slept with my ex," Emma said, the words tumbling out like stones into still water. "It happened 3 weeks ago. Ryan contacted me, said he was in town, and—" She trailed off, waiting for the explosion she was certain would come. But David simply closed his laptop with a soft click. He leaned back in his chair, his hands folded calmly in his lap, and studied her face with an expression she couldn't read. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the rhythmic patter of rain and the distant hum of their refrigerator. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally, his voice so level it made her stomach drop. Emma had prepared for screaming, for accusations, for the passionate anger that would at least prove she still mattered enough to hurt him. Instead, his composure felt like ice water in her veins. She searched his face for any crack in his facade, any sign of the devastation she knew she'd caused. "That's it?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "That's all you have to say?" David stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. At 6 feet tall, he had always made her feel protected, but now his presence felt distant, unreachable. "What would you like me to say, Emma? Should I beg you to choose me? Should I rage and break things?" She flinched at the quiet intensity in his words. This wasn't the reaction she'd anticipated, and somehow it felt infinitely worse than any tantrum would have been. "I've known something was wrong for weeks," he continued, moving to the window and gazing out at their rain-soaked garden. "The way you stopped reaching for me at night, how you'd leave the room when I entered, the constant texting with someone you claimed was just a friend from work." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not anger, but a profound sadness mixed with something that looked dangerously like relief. "I've been preparing myself for this conversation, actually. Part of me is grateful you finally had the courage to be honest." The words hit Emma like physical blows. She had expected to be the one in control, the one making choices about their future. Instead, she found herself staring at a man who seemed to have already moved beyond the betrayal she thought would destroy him. This story teaches us that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't anger, but the quiet dignity of self-respect and the strength to let go when someone shows you they're no longer committed to what you've built together. 3 months earlier, their marriage had seemed unshakable. David remembered the morning he'd surprised Emma with breakfast in bed, fresh strawberries and cream, her favorite coffee, and a single white rose from their garden. She'd pulled him down beside her, her blonde hair spread across the pillow like spun gold, and they'd made love with the lazy passion of 2 people who believed they had forever. "I love how you take care of me," she'd whispered against his chest afterward, tracing patterns on his skin with her fingertips. Her touch had been electric then, each caress a promise of their shared future. But promises, David now realized, were only as strong as the person making them. The change had been gradual at first. Emma started working late more often, claiming her marketing firm was demanding longer hours. She'd come home exhausted, barely touching the dinners he prepared, always too tired for conversation or intimacy. When he'd suggested a weekend getaway to reconnect, she dismissed it with an irritated wave of her hand. "We can't all just take time off whenever we feel like it, David," she'd snapped, though he worked just as hard as a financial analyst at a growing investment firm. Their physical connection had withered next. The woman who once initiated passionate encounters in their shower, who used to surprise him with lingerie and whispered fantasies, began treating their bedroom like a hotel room she happened to share. She'd slip into bed with her back turned, claiming headaches or stress whenever he reached for her. David had tried everything to bridge the growing distance. He'd planned romantic dinners that she picked at distractedly. He'd suggested couples counseling, which she'd agreed to attend but then cancelled at the last minute repeatedly. He'd even taken up cooking classes, thinking maybe if he could just be more interesting, more engaging, she'd find her way back to him. The night before her confession, he'd watched her text someone while they sat on their couch, supposedly watching their favorite movie. The smile that played across her lips as she typed was one he hadn't seen directed at him in months. When he'd asked who she was messaging, she'd snapped the phone closed and muttered something about work drama. That's when David finally accepted what he'd been refusing to acknowledge: his wife was already gone. The woman sitting beside him was a stranger wearing Emma's face, going through the motions of a marriage she'd already abandoned in her heart. He'd spent that sleepless night staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe beside him, and made a decision that would define how he handled whatever came next. If she wanted out, he wouldn't beg her to stay. If she'd found someone else, he wouldn't compete for a prize that was no longer his to win. He would maintain his dignity, protect his self-worth, and face whatever truth she finally worked up the courage to tell him. When she'd said those 4 devastating words, "I slept with my ex," David felt something inside him settle into place. Not peace exactly, but the grim satisfaction of having his worst fears confirmed. The betrayal hurt, but the uncertainty had been killing him slowly. Sometimes preparing for the worst pain isn't pessimism. It's the self-preservation that allows us to respond with strength instead of desperation when our deepest fears become reality. The days following Emma's confession moved with surreal normalcy. David continued his morning routine: coffee, newspaper, quick workout, while Emma moved through their shared space like a ghost haunting her own life. She seemed to expect some delayed explosion that never came, watching him with nervous anticipation that gradually morphed into frustrated confusion. "Are you planning to say anything else about what I told you?" she asked on the 3rd day, cornering him in their bedroom as he selected a tie for work. David finished knotting the navy silk before responding. "What would you like me to say? Would it change anything?" The question hung between them like a blade. Emma's reflection in their dresser mirror looked pale, her blonde waves unwashed and dull. She'd been expecting to navigate his anger, to manage his pain, perhaps even to comfort him through the devastation. His continued composure left her with nowhere to direct the guilt that was eating her alive. "I don't know how to fix this if you won't even fight for us," she said, her voice cracking. David turned to face her fully, and she was startled by the clarity in his dark eyes. "Emma, you can't fix something you've already destroyed. And I won't fight for someone who's already chosen to leave." That evening, Ryan called while David was in the shower. Emma answered on the 2nd ring, her voice dropping to the intimate whisper she'd once reserved for her husband. David heard fragments through the bathroom door. "I know, it's complicated, and he's not reacting the way I expected, and maybe we should meet to talk about next steps." When he emerged, towel around his waist, Emma was sitting on their bed looking guilty and defiant simultaneously. The contrast between her expressions would have been comical if it wasn't so revealing. "That was Ryan," she said unnecessarily. "He's concerned about how I'm handling all this." "How considerate of him," David replied, pulling on pajama pants with the same calm deliberation he brought to everything. "Did you tell him he doesn't need to worry? That you're an adult who made an adult decision and can handle the consequences?" Emma's face flushed. "It's not that simple. We have history, feelings." "Do you love him?" David asked, cutting through her explanations with surgical precision. The directness of the question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I don't know. Maybe. It's confusing." "Then let me make it less confusing," David said, sitting on the edge of their bed where they'd once planned their future, where they'd made love, where they'd whispered secrets and dreams. "You're going to stay at your sister's place this weekend. Use the time to figure out what you want. When you come back, we'll discuss how to proceed based on your decision." "You can't just kick me out of my own house," Emma protested, though the fight in her voice was weak. "I'm not kicking you out. I'm giving you space to think clearly, without the guilt or confusion of being around me. Consider it a gift." The word gift stung her more than any accusation could have. She was facing the gradual realization that her betrayal hadn't broken David, it had freed him. While she'd been tangled up in the excitement and drama of her affair, he'd been quietly preparing for a life that didn't revolve around waiting for her to remember she loved him. That night, they slept in the same bed for what would be the last time, an ocean of space between them despite the mattress being only queen-sized. Emma lay awake listening to David's steady breathing, trying to remember when his presence had stopped feeling like home and started feeling like a prison she was desperate to escape. The cruelest irony of betrayal is that it often hurts the betrayer more than the betrayed, especially when met with dignity instead of desperation. Emma's weekend at her sister's house became a harsh mirror reflecting the reality of her choices. Lisa, 3 years younger and infinitely wiser about matters of the heart, didn't offer the sympathy Emma had expected. "So you cheated on the best man you've ever dated, and you're upset because he's not begging you to stay?" Lisa asked bluntly over Saturday morning coffee. "What exactly did you think would happen?" Emma curled deeper into the oversized sweater she'd borrowed, feeling exposed despite the layers of fabric. "I thought he'd fight for our marriage. I thought he'd at least try to understand why it happened." "Did you try to understand why it happened before you hopped into bed with Ryan?" The question hit like a slap. Emma had been avoiding that particular examination, preferring to frame her affair as something that just happened rather than something she'd chosen. But Lisa's kitchen table wasn't offering any hiding places. "Ryan made me feel alive again," Emma said finally. "With David, everything became so predictable. We had the same conversations, the same routines. Ryan reminded me who I used to be before I became half of a couple." "You mean he reminded you who you were before you grew up and learned how to build something lasting with another person," Lisa corrected. "Emma, you had a man who came home to you every night, who cooked for you, who tried to plan romantic getaways when he sensed you pulling away. And instead of talking to him about feeling restless, you decided to blow up your entire life for some excitement." That afternoon, Ryan picked Emma up for what was supposed to be a romantic lunch. Sitting across from him at an upscale bistro, she found herself comparing everything to David. Where David was thoughtful, Ryan was impulsive. Where David was steady, Ryan was unpredictable. Where David had spent 5 years learning exactly how she liked her coffee, Ryan couldn't remember if she preferred white or red wine. "So what's the plan?" Ryan asked, cutting into his steak with careless efficiency. "When do you tell him you're leaving?" The casual way he discussed dismantling her marriage made Emma's stomach turn. "It's complicated. We own a house together, have shared finances. Babe, those are just details. The important thing is that we found each other again." He reached across the table to take her hand, the same hand that still wore David's ring. "Remember how good we were together?" But sitting there, Emma realized she didn't remember them being particularly good together. She remembered the drama, the passionate fights followed by equally passionate reconciliations, the constant uncertainty about where they stood. She'd been 23 then, mistaking chaos for excitement and instability for passion. "What do you want from this?" she asked suddenly. "Long term, I mean." Ryan's smile faltered slightly. "Let's just see where it goes. No need to put pressure on it by planning too far ahead." The non-answer told Emma everything she needed to know. While she'd been imagining a future with him, one that justified destroying her marriage, he was thinking about an extended fling with a married woman who offered excitement without commitment. That night, lying in Lisa's guest bed, Emma finally allowed herself to think about what she was actually giving up. David's steady presence every morning. The way he listened when she talked about work troubles. How he'd researched her favorite authors and bought first editions for her birthday. The quiet intimacy of their Sunday morning routines. The security of knowing someone would always have her back, would always choose her, would always come home to her. She'd traded all of that for a few hours of feeling young and reckless again. And the man she betrayed David for couldn't even commit to wanting more than just seeing where it goes. Sometimes we don't realize the value of what we have until we've thrown it away for something that glitters but has no substance. Emma returned home Sunday evening to find David in their kitchen, preparing what looked suspiciously like her favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and the risotto he'd perfected after months of practice. The domestic scene felt both familiar and foreign, like viewing her old life through glass. "We need to talk," she said, setting down her overnight bag with hands that trembled slightly. "I figured we would," David replied, not turning from the stove. "Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. We can talk after." The meal passed in loaded silence. Emma picked at her food, her appetite destroyed by the weight of what she needed to say. David ate with his usual methodical appreciation, complimenting the wine she'd barely touched. His continued normalcy felt like a rebuke to the chaos she'd created. "The salmon is perfect," she said finally, desperate to fill the silence. "I'm glad you like it. I thought, if this is one of our last dinners together, it should be a good one." The words hit her like cold water. "David, Let me finish," he said gently but firmly. "I've spent this weekend thinking too. About us, about what I want, about what I'm willing to accept in a marriage." He set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I won't be anyone's safety net while they explore other options. I won't compete for my wife's affection with other men. And I won't build a life with someone who sees our stability as something to escape from rather than something to treasure." Emma felt tears building behind her eyes. "I made a mistake. I know that now. Ryan isn't. We aren't." "What? You're not compatible?" "He doesn't want the same things you do. He can't offer you the security and partnership you've had here." David's voice remained calm, but she could hear the steel beneath it. "I'm sure those are all true, Emma. But that's not why you're sitting here wanting to fix this." "Then why do you think I'm here?" "Because you're scared. Because choosing him meant giving up everything you've built, and choosing me means admitting you threw away something precious for essentially nothing." He stood up, beginning to clear the dishes with the same efficient grace he brought to everything. "But I'm not interested in being chosen because I'm the safer option. I want to be with someone who chooses me because they can't imagine being without me." Emma followed him to the kitchen, watching as he loaded the dishwasher, a domestic ritual they'd performed together thousands of times. "I can't imagine being without you. This weekend made me realize." "This weekend made you realize that the grass isn't actually greener," David interrupted. "But Emma, the damage is done. Even if I could forgive the cheating, and I'm not sure I can't forgive the fact that you checked out of our marriage emotionally months before anything physical happened. You stopped choosing us long before you chose him." The truth of his words cut through all her prepared arguments. She had checked out, had started viewing their life together as a burden rather than a blessing. She'd been so focused on what was missing that she'd stopped seeing what was there. "I love you," she whispered, the words feeling both completely true and entirely inadequate. David turned to face her one last time, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart break completely. It wasn't anger or hatred, it was pity mixed with the kind of love that accepts when it's time to let go. "I know you do, Em. But love isn't enough if it comes with resentment, if it's a choice made out of fear rather than joy. You deserve to find what makes you happy, and I deserve to be with someone who doesn't have to convince themselves that I'm enough." 3 months later, Emma signed the divorce papers in a lawyer's office downtown. David was polite, even kind, handling the division of their assets with the same fairness he'd brought to their marriage. She kept the house but not the home, that had died the night she confessed. She never did pursue anything serious with Ryan. Their affair, stripped of the forbidden excitement that had fueled it, proved as shallow as David had suspected. But the lesson learned came too late to save what she destroyed through her own restlessness and poor choices. The most profound lesson isn't about forgiveness or second chances. It's about recognizing the difference between love and gratitude, between choosing someone and settling for them, and understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go to find the happiness they deserve, even when that someone isn't you.